Somebody has already told you why your Social Security check is going to be cut. And whatever reason they handed you, there is a very good chance it was not one of the four that actually did it. Here is the part nobody argues about. Your check gets cut by 22%. That is not a rumor, and it is not a number somebody made up on a website. It comes out of the government's own annual report, published this year, and it applies to every kind of check the program sends. Retirement, survivor, spouse, divorced spouse, disability, disabled adult child. There is no grandfather clause. People go looking for one every time this comes up. They say, well, I am already receiving mine, so surely they would not touch a check that is already going out. They would. The law does not sort people that way. When the reserves run out, the program is only allowed to pay what is coming in that month, and what is coming in covers 78% of what was promised. That is the entire mechanism. Everybody gets 78 cents where a dollar used to be, on the same day, in the same month, regardless of age or need or how long you paid in. So whether it is real is not the interesting question. Why is the interesting question? Because four things cause this. All four of them have already happened. And here is what changes how you should listen to the rest of this. Three of those four are finished, locked. They cannot be undone by anybody, in any party, at any speed, no matter who wins anything. Only the fourth one is still moving. It is the only one still getting worse while you sit there, and it is the one almost nobody names. Let me show you the document first, because everything after this comes out of it. Every year, the Board of Trustees of the Social Security Trust Funds publishes a report to Congress. It is signed by the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Commissioner of Social Security. It is not a think tank product, and it is not partisan. The same office produces it under every administration and has done so for decades. This year's report says the retirement fund, the one that pays the check most of you are receiving, can pay 100% of scheduled benefits until the fourth quarter of 2032. After that, 78%. And it moved. Last year's report said the first quarter of 2033. This year it says the fourth quarter of 2032. 1 quarter closer, in 1 year. That is the thing worth holding on to. It is not a fixed date on a calendar somewhere. It is a date that has been drifting toward you, a little at a time, and it drifted again in June. My name is Kevin. I read the boring documents, so you do not have to sit with them. Every week, I go find the thing that quietly decides what happens to your money, and I bring it here in plain English before it costs you anything. If that is useful to you, subscribe and turn the bell on, because the fourth reason in this video is the one that decides how big the eventual fix has to be, and it is the one that gets worse every single year. Nobody touches it. Reason 1. The cap stopped covering what it used to cover, and nobody voted for that. You pay 6.2% of your paycheck into Social Security. Your employer pays another 6.2% on top, 12.4% total. If you were self-employed, you paid both halves yourself, and you know exactly how that felt. But that tax stops at a line. In 2026, that line sits at $184,500. Every dollar you earn up to that gets taxed. Every dollar above it does not. Most people know that much. What almost nobody knows is what that line was supposed to do. When Congress last did a serious overhaul of this program in 1983, they did not just pick a number out of the air. They set the cap so that it would capture 90% of all the wages earned in the country. That was the design. 90% of American earnings would flow through the payroll tax, and the small slice above the line would not. And they indexed it. Every year, the cap rises automatically with average wage growth, so nobody would ever have to vote on it again. They thought they had solved it permanently. It did not hold. Here is the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, Stephen Goss, testifying to the House Budget Committee. He said the share of total covered earnings falling below the taxable maximum declined from about 90% in 1983 to about 82.5% by the year 2000. And then this line, which I think is the most honest sentence anybody in this fight has said out loud. He said, "This change was not anticipated in 1983. Nobody anticipated it. Nobody legislated it. Nobody stood up and proposed lowering the share of American wages that funds Social Security. It happened because of how wages moved. The cap rises with the average wage. But earnings above the cap grew faster than average wages did. So year after year, more of the country's total earnings floated up over that line and out of reach of the tax. And the automatic indexing had no way to catch it." Goss put a number on the effect. Payroll tax income into Social Security is about 8% lower than it would have been if that ratio had stayed where it was designed to be. The Congressional Budget Office reports the same slide at about 83% of covered earnings as of 2020. The Urban Institute ran the counterfactual and estimated that if 90% of earnings had been taxed the whole way since 1983, the program's long-term financing gap would be roughly a quarter smaller than it is today. Now sit with the shape of that for a second because it is genuinely strange. A rule was written to do a specific job. The rule never changed. The job stopped getting done. And there was no moment where anybody could point at a vote or a bill or a signature and say, that is where it happened. It just leaked, quietly, for 43 years, and the leak is now one of the biggest single-line items in the shortfall. Alvie is 79, and he worked it out himself on the back of a grocery receipt at his kitchen table because he did not believe me the first time. He was a lineman for a rural electric cooperative for 34 years. Good money for the area, hard on the body, and every dollar of it went through that payroll tax because he never came close to the cap in his life. Not 1 year. What bothered him was not the fairness argument. He is a conservative man and he does not particularly want the government taking more from anybody. What bothered him was that he had been paying into a design, and the design quietly stopped working, and in 34 years of pay stubs, not one person ever told him. He said the thing that stuck with me. He said, I would have accepted almost any answer. I just did not know there was a question. And that is where most of you are right now on this whole subject. Not wrong, not careless, just never handed the question. Which is the thing this whole channel exists to fix, and it is why I put the quiet rules together, because the moment this actually lands on a household is not today, while you are watching a video about it. It is a Wednesday in a few years, when the check that arrives is smaller than the check that arrived last month, and somebody sits down at a table with a stack of bills and works out for the very first time which ones the new number covers and which ones it does not. Doing that arithmetic for the first time on the day it has already happened is the worst possible time to do it. Doing it now, while nothing has changed yet, costs you one quiet afternoon. It is at kevinexplains.shop. The link is in the description below and in the pinned comment at the top. And if you are watching this on your television right now, there is a code on the screen you can point your phone camera at. 7-day guarantee, no questions. If it does not put something in your hands you did not have before, send it back. Now I owe you the other side of the cap argument because there is a real one, and you are not going to hear it from most of the people covering this. The case for lifting or removing the cap is the one you have probably heard. Everybody pays the same rate on every dollar. It closes a large share of the gap. Around 6% of covered workers earn above the line, so it touches very few households directly. The case against it is not frivolous, and it deserves to be stated properly. Analysts at the Tax Foundation and the Heritage Foundation and the Concord Coalition make roughly this argument. 90% was an all-time high, not a normal level. Across the program's whole history, the average share of earnings below the cap has been closer to 83%, which is about where it sits now. By that reading, 1983 was the outlier, and today is the historical norm. They also point out that some of the decline has nothing to do with wage inequality at all. Compensation has shifted. Employer-paid health insurance has grown enormously, and none of it is taxable wages. More people take income through business structures rather than salary. So part of what looks like earnings escaping over the cap is really earnings never showing up as a paycheck in the first place. And there is a benefit side nobody mentions. Social Security pays you based on what you paid in. Raise the cap without changing the benefit formula, and you have raised taxes without raising benefits, which breaks the contributory logic the program was built on. Raise the cap and pay the matching benefits, and you have collected a lot more money while also promising a lot more money, which closes less of the gap than the headline suggests. I am not going to tell you which of those to believe. Both sides have real arithmetic. What I will tell you is that the drift happened, it was not anticipated, and it is a large piece of why you are looking at 22%. Reason 2. The ratio already flipped, and everybody involved has already been born. Social Security is not a savings account with your name on it. There is no vault. The money coming out of your neighbor's paycheck this Friday is the money going into your account next month. Workers pay in, beneficiaries draw out, and the whole thing balances on how many of each there are. So the ratio is the program. In 1960, there were about 5.1 workers paying in for every one person drawing benefits. Today, there are about 2.7. The Bipartisan Policy Center puts it at 2.9 and heading to roughly 2.2 by the 2070s. JP Morgan's analysis of this year's report puts today at 2.7 and about 2.2 by 2045. Take whichever of those you like. The direction is the same and nobody disputes it. Roughly 5 workers per retiree became roughly 3, and roughly 3 is on its way to roughly 2. Now here is what makes this different from every other reason on this list. And it is the part that does not get said plainly enough. Every single person who will retire in the next 20 years is already alive. They are already working. They are already in the data. Every person who will be paying into the system for the next 18 years has already been born. You cannot legislate your way out of that. You cannot pass a bill in 2027 that creates additional 40-year-old workers in 2032. The workforce of the next 2 decades is a completed fact. It is finished. So when a politician tells you the demographic problem needs to be addressed, understand exactly what that can and cannot mean. It can mean changing the tax rate on the workers who exist. It can mean changing the benefits paid to the retirees who exist. It cannot mean producing more workers in the window that matters. That door closed decades ago, and nobody noticed it closing because it closed one birth certificate at a time. And this year, the people who do the projections change their minds about where it goes next, which is worth understanding on its own. 2 assumptions moved in this year's report, and between them, they account for most of the damage. The first is fertility. For years, the trustees assumed the long-run birth rate would settle at 1.9 children per woman. Outside analysts, including the Congressional Budget Office and the Census Bureau, had been saying for a while that this was too optimistic. This year, the trustees agreed and lowered it to 1.75. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget calculated that this single change accounts for a 0.35% worsening of the actuarial balance, which in this world is an enormous move. The second is immigration. The report lowered both its historical estimates and its forward assumptions for net immigration. Fewer workers arriving means fewer people paying in, and since immigrants tend to arrive at working age and pay in for years before drawing anything, that assumption matters more than its size suggests. There was a third change, and it is the one that ties directly to something I covered on this channel a few weeks ago. The tax package passed last year reduced the income tax that beneficiaries owe on their Social Security benefits. Those income taxes flow back into the trust fund. Less tax on benefits means less money returning to the fund, and the trustees name that as one of the reasons the depletion date moved a quarter closer. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College lists the same 3 drivers, so a tax cut that helped a lot of households this spring also moved the date on the calendar. Both of those things are true at once, and anybody telling you only one of them is selling you something. Norene taught 3rd grade in the same brick building for 31 years and retired at 66, which she describes as 3 years later than she wanted and 4 years earlier than she should have. She was not confused about any of this. She reads. She had watched the numbers move for a decade. What she had never done was put her own number next to it. Her check is a little over $2,000. When she finally did the arithmetic, the 22% came out to more than $450 a month, about $5,400 a year. She told me she had been reading about this as news for years, national news, something happening to the country, and that the first time she actually understood it was the afternoon she wrote her own 2 numbers on a piece of paper, one above the other, and looked at the gap between them. That is the difference between information and arithmetic. One of them you consume, the other one changes what you do next. Reason 3. The program crossed over years ago and nobody sent an announcement. For most of the last 40 years, Social Security ran a surplus. More money came in than went out, and the extra piled up in the trust fund. That was deliberate. The 1983 deal built that surplus on purpose, so the baby boom generation would partly pre-fund its own retirement. Then it turned around, and the turning around happened in 2 separate stages that most people have merged into one. The Social Security Administration states both dates plainly. The program's cost has exceeded its non-interest income since 2010. That is the first crossover. Payroll taxes alone stopped covering the benefits 16 years ago. For a while, the interest earned on the trust fund covered the difference, which is why nothing appeared to change. Then total cost passed total income in 2021. That is the second crossover, and that is the one that started the drawdown. Since 2021, the fund has been shrinking. Not slowing, shrinking. In the last calendar year alone, the combined reserves fell by $160 billion, down to $2.56 trillion. And I want you to notice what did not happen during any of that. Nobody wrote to you in 2010. Nobody wrote to you in 2021. There was no letter, no line on your annual statement, no notice with your December check saying, the program has moved from surplus into drawdown. Your check arrived on the same day of the month, in the same amount, adjusted for the same cost of living increase, and everything felt exactly the way it had always felt. That is the thing about a slow financial event. It has no sound. A bank failure has a sound. A market crash has a sound. 16 years of a fund draining has no sound at all, and the only people who could hear it were the ones who read a 400-page actuarial report every June. So if you feel like this came out of nowhere, it did not. It came out of 2 decades that were completely silent from where you were sitting. And there is a detail inside that crossover worth understanding, because it explains why the date keeps sliding instead of holding still. The reserves are not a fixed pile that drains at a steady rate. Every year, what comes out depends on how many people are drawing and how much each of them gets. What goes in depends on how many people are working, what they earn, and how much of those earnings sits under the cap. Change any one of those inputs even slightly, and the depletion date moves. That is why the answer is a different quarter almost every June. Not because anybody is guessing wildly, and not because the report is unreliable. Because it is a live calculation on a system with 71 million people drawing and 185 million people paying in, and small movements in enormous numbers produce visible movements in the date, which cuts both ways, and I want to be straight about that. It has moved earlier several years running. It could move later. This year's report also contained 2 changes that pushed in the helpful direction: higher assumed productivity and, grimly, higher mortality. Those partly offset the fertility and immigration revisions. The net was still worse, but it was not all one direction. So when you hear a date, hold it a little loosely. What you should not hold loosely is the direction of travel, because that has been consistent for a very long time. That silence is the whole reason I do this, and it is what the guide is built for. Because the cost of not having done this arithmetic is not abstract. For a household like Norene's, it is over $5,400 a year. And for a married couple where both checks get cut, it is well past $10,000. The guide is simply the version of this that fits on your kitchen table instead of in a federal report, so that when something changes, you already know which line in your budget it lands on. Same place, kevinexplains.shop. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment, and there is a code on your screen if you are on the television. 7-day guarantee every time. Picture the person who finds out what a smaller check means on the same morning the smaller check arrives. Reason 4. The waiting is itself a reason, and it is the only one still in motion. This is the one that almost never makes it into a video because it is not dramatic and there is nobody to blame in a satisfying way. It is also, in my opinion, the most important thing in this entire subject. Every year that passes without a fix, the fix required gets bigger. Not the same size arriving later, bigger. Here is the measurement. The trustees expressed the shortfall as a percentage of taxable payroll. Last year it was 3.82%. This year it is 4.42%. That is a 16% increase in the size of the problem in a single year. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget notes that this is the largest shortfall in nearly half a century, and 2.3 times the size of the shortfall projected back in 2010. JP Morgan translated it into something you can actually feel. To close the gap using the payroll tax alone, the combined 12.4% would have to rise to roughly 16.8%. A year ago, that same fix was a noticeably smaller ask, and the total long-range shortfall, expressed in dollars, went from about $26 trillion to about $30 trillion in 1 year. Now, why does delay make it worse instead of just later? 2 reasons, and they are both simple. The first is that there are fewer years left to spread the change over. A 1% adjustment phased in over 30 years is something almost nobody notices. The same adjustment starting in year 28 is not gentle because it has to be much larger, and it lands on far fewer paychecks. The second is who is left to share it. The trustees make this exact point in their own recommendation. They write that acting sooner would allow more generations to share in the needed revenue increases or benefit reductions. Every year of delay removes a cohort from the pool of people who could have helped carry it and concentrates the whole weight on whoever is standing there at the end. So the fourth reason is the only one on this list that is still being made. The cap already drifted. The ratio already flipped. The crossover already happened. Those three are history, and no vote reverses them. Weighting is happening right now, today, while this video plays. And that leads straight into the most expensive mistake people make when they hear all of this. So I want to spend real time on it. When somebody learns their check might be cut in a few years, the instinct is to grab it early. Claim now, lock it in, get some of it before they take it. I have had more emails about this than almost anything else I cover. Please understand what that actually does. Claiming before your full retirement age permanently reduces your monthly amount, not temporarily, for the rest of your life and for a surviving spouse's life after that. Claim at 62 with a full retirement age of 67, and you are looking at roughly a 30% permanent reduction. Now put the two things together. If the cut arrives, it applies to whatever your benefit is at that time. It is a percentage, not a fixed dollar amount. So a person who claimed early does not dodge anything. They take the permanent reduction, and then the 22% comes off the already reduced number. You do not beat the cut by claiming early. You take both. JP Morgan addressed this question directly in their analysis of this year's report, asking whether people should claim early out of fear of a future cut, and answering plainly that they do not believe so. That is a firm with every reason to be conservative about this, saying it in writing. There are perfectly good reasons to claim at 62. Health that makes waiting a bad bet. A job that ended and bills that did not. A spouse's claiming strategy that works better that way. Needing the money is always a legitimate reason, and I will never tell somebody in that position they were foolish. But fear of a projected cut in the future is not a good reason, because the math of that decision runs against you in both directions at once. If your own situation on this is genuinely complicated, if you are trying to work out whether waiting makes sense with everything else you have going on, email me. The address is on your screen and in the description below. I read every one that comes in. So those are the four. Now the four you were probably handed instead because you have heard every one of them and you deserve a straight answer on each. The first is that the trust fund was stolen. Somebody raided it, spent it, emptied it. This is the most common one and it is not correct. The trust fund holds special issue Treasury securities. The government borrowed the surplus, which is exactly what the law directs it to do, and it has paid interest on that borrowing continuously and has never missed a payment. The reserves are $2.56 trillion and they are on the books. You can go read the balance. The money was lent, not lost, and the drawdown you are watching is the fund being spent down on benefits, which is precisely what it was built to do. The second is fraud. Is there fraud in Social Security? Yes. Should it be pursued? Absolutely. But the scale does not do what people want it to do. The agency's own Office of the Inspector General reported that across fiscal years 2015 through 2022, improper payments came to under 1% of total benefits paid. And most of those are not fraud at all. They are overpayments, usually caused by a change in someone's circumstances that got reported late, and the agency chases people to pay them back. Recover every dollar of it, and you have not made a meaningful dent in a shortfall this size. The third is that people in the country illegally are collecting benefits. You cannot receive Social Security retirement benefits without lawful status and a valid work-authorized Social Security number. It is not a policy preference, it is the documentation requirement, and anybody who has ever sat across a desk at a field office knows what happens when the paperwork is not there. The flow actually runs the other direction. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy estimated that undocumented workers paid roughly $25.7 billion in Social Security taxes in a single year, while being unable to claim anything back. Whatever you believe about immigration policy generally, and people in this audience believe very different things, on this narrow question, the money moves into the fund, not out of it. The fourth is that benefits are simply too generous. The average retirement check runs a bit over $2,000 a month. That is the entire income for a large share of the people watching this. I will let you decide whether that reads as generous. Now here is what I actually find interesting about that list. And it is not that the four claims are wrong, it is that all four of them give you somebody to be angry at. A thief, a cheat, an outsider, a freeloader. Every one of those stories has a person in it who did something to you, and there is real satisfaction in that, and I understand it completely. The 4 real reasons have nobody in them: a ratio that drifted, a cap that stopped doing its job through no vote by anybody, a crossover that happened silently, a delay with 1,000 authors and no single one. You cannot get angry at a ratio. There is nothing to be furious at. And a story with nobody to blame spreads about 1/10 as fast as a story with a villain in it, which is precisely why you have heard the wrong 4 many more times than you have heard the right 4. Doyle is 72, and he told me he stopped talking about Social Security at family gatherings about 4 years ago. Every time it came up, within about 90 seconds it stopped being about Social Security and became about something else entirely. Whose party did what? Who is to blame? 2 of his sons-in-law will not sit at the same end of a table anymore. And what he noticed, and what he could not get anybody else to notice, is that not one person in that room actually disagreed about the thing itself. Every single one of them wanted the checks to keep coming in full. All of them, without exception. They agreed completely on the destination, and they could not get through 2 minutes on the route. He said the argument was so loud that nobody in the room ever found out that the fund had crossed over in 2010. 12 years of arguing about it, and the single most concrete fact about it never came up once. Here is where I come down on all of it, and you are welcome to land somewhere else entirely. On the fix, I do not have a recommendation for you, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Lifting the cap, adjusting the retirement age, changing how the cost of living increase is calculated, means testing at the top, some combination of all of it. Each one has serious people making serious arguments on both sides. Each one takes from somebody, and which one you prefer depends on things I cannot decide for you. Anybody who tells you there is a painless option is not being straight with you. What I will say is narrower, and I think it holds regardless of where you sit politically. 3 of the 4 reasons in this video are settled history. The cap drifted, the ratio flipped, the crossover happened. Nothing anybody does now touches any of that. The 4th one is the only live one, and it is the only one that has gotten worse every year I have been reading these reports. 16% worse in the last 12 months alone. And the reason it keeps getting worse is not that anybody voted for it to. It is that doing nothing requires no agreement from anybody, and doing something requires agreement from everybody. That is the actual asymmetry. Inaction is free and automatic. Action is expensive and requires people who cannot stand each other to sit down together. So the default runs year after year, and every year the default is more expensive than it was. That is my honest read. Take it or leave it. So what do you actually do with all of this? 4 things, and none of them require you to hold an opinion about any of the politics. First, get your own number. Log into your account at the Social Security website. Find your benefit amount or your estimate and write it down. Then write down 78% of it directly underneath. Those 2 numbers on one piece of paper will do more for you than 100 videos on this subject, mine included. Second, if you are married, run the survivor version, because that is the one nobody calculates. When one spouse dies, the household does not keep both checks, it keeps the larger one. So take the smaller check out of your household income entirely, then take 22% off what is left, and look at that figure. For a great many couples, that is the number that actually decides things, and most people have never once seen it written down. Third, while you are logged in, check your earnings record. Look at every year you worked and make sure it is there. A missing year from an employer that reported it under a wrong digit permanently lowers your benefit, and it is fixable. That one is not about 2032 at all. That is money right now. Fourth, and I mean this one seriously, do not claim early because of anything in this video. The cut is a percentage. It comes off whatever your number is. Claiming early lowers your number permanently, and then the percentage still applies. You would be paying a lifetime price to avoid something you would not actually avoid. Alvie paid into a design for 34 years and never got told the design had quietly stopped working. Norene followed the story for a decade as national news and only understood it the afternoon she wrote her own 2 numbers down and looked at the space between them. And Doyle sat through 12 years of family arguments about Social Security, in which the most important fact about Social Security never came up once, while everybody in the room wanted exactly the same outcome. None of them lacked intelligence or attention. What they lacked was the one page that turned a national story into their own arithmetic. So make that page this week. Your number, 78% of your number, the survivor version, and a clean earnings record. It is one quiet afternoon at a kitchen table, and it is the only part of this whole enormous subject that is entirely inside your control. I am Kevin. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to check the quiet rules at kevinexplains.shop.